Hey guys, tonight we're time traveling to a cold, wind-swept land where honor is everything. Lawsuits are personal, and bread, yes, bread, can start a blood feud. You wake up in a cramped turf house, your breath curling into clouds in the early morning air, your feet already numb from the stone floor. The scent of last night's barley loaf still lingers faintly, mixed with sheep dung smoke and damp wool. Someone's already outside breaking ice off the water trough. Welcome to medieval Iceland. This is not the Iceland of soft wool sweaters and blue lagoon selfies. This is the year 1100. Give or take. You are wrapped in layers of hand-woven wool, blinking into the cold sunlight, slicing through a sheep bladder window, and you are already furious. Your neighbor across the fjord, Egil, with his smug eyebrows and mysteriously golden crusts, has started selling bread that tastes suspiciously like your family's recipe, the one passed down from your grandmother's grandmother. Spoken only aloud, never inked. You suspect he either stole it, mimicked it, or perhaps, worst of all, married into it, just to claim it as his own. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You rub your eyes and pull on your leather shoes. There's snow creeping in through the roof again. But that is not your biggest problem. Iceland in the Middle Ages is governed by the Althing, one of the oldest parliamentary systems in the world. It is not run by kings, but by chieftains and law speakers. And every summer, the entire island gathers at Invellir, a dramatic rift valley where disputes are shouted into the wind and settled with varying degrees of satisfaction and sarcasm. Historians still argue whether Iceland's legal culture was uniquely democratic or just unusually obsessed with creative grudge holding. Either way, you are preparing your case, because in Iceland, even in this unforgiving, treeless land of lava and ice, people take law seriously. And if Egil really did steal your bread recipe, that is not just a personal offense. It is a breach of social order, property rights, and dignity. Bread, after all, is not just food. It is identity, invention, survival. Most households bake with barley because wheat is rare and expensive, shipped in from Norway or Denmark in limited quantities. The richer families might have access to rye, or even a whisper of imported spelt, but for most Icelanders, bread is a barley-based lifeline, often mixed with moss, seaweed, or crushed fish bones to stretch it further during the long winters. Quirky tidbit time. Some households were rumored to bake loaves with sheep urine to help preserve them longer. Not the flavor profile you want with jam. But hey, it is about calories, not cuisine. You step outside, and the cold slaps your face like an unpaid debt. The sky is a flat pale blue, and smoke spirals from turf house chimneys like drawn sighs. Egil's house sits smugly on the other side of the frozen stream. You half expect to see him standing on his roof, smirking, holding a suspiciously shiny loaf. You trudge across the yard toward the small lean to where your mother bakes. She is kneading dough with stiff, cold hands, the stone oven glowing faintly red. She eyes you as you enter. You going to the all thing over this? You nod. Good. He stole it. That crust is ours. This is not just domestic drama. This is community theater at scale. Iceland's medieval law code, the Gurges, is a dense, occasionally poetic collection of rules that covered everything from livestock ownership to outlawry. And yes, recipe theft was actionable, not necessarily under its own heading, but under categories like fraud, slander, or unauthorized economic gain. And while the bread itself may be humble, small, flat, often unleavened discs cooked on stones or low fires, the symbolism is enormous. A unique crust or flavor? That is your clan's fingerprint. And in a culture with no surnames, no formal courts, and very few written records, reputation is your resume. You begin mentally composing your claim that Egil unlawfully reproduced a family recipe for personal gain. That this act not only harmed your household's economy, but also diluted the cultural value of a technique honed over generations. Your father is sharpening a blade nearby. He looks up. Do not bring a knife to Ingvellir, he says dryly. Bring witnesses and samples, because that is how some of these disputes go. You haul your own bread to the Althing. You slice it in front of law speakers. You let respected elders taste both loaves and offer their verdicts. There is no scientific method, no blind taste test, just politics, pride, and a whole lot of passive aggression. One actual recorded case from a 13th century folktale tells of a woman named Thorbjörg who sued her sister-in-law for using her blessing song while baking. The song, she claimed, made the bread rise better, and without her permission to sing it, the loaves were spiritually counterfeit. The case was dismissed, but the family never spoke again. You gather your sample loaves into a cloth bag. One is slightly burnt. Another is perfect. You leave the burnt one at home. Presentation matters, especially when you are standing on a lava field arguing about dough. Outside, Egil's wife is hanging laundry. She sees you and quickly ducks back in. Suspicious. Historians still debate whether these lawsuits were about the bread itself or what it represented. Was it really about the recipe, or was it a proxy for land rights, inheritance, or simmering feuds over sheep? We may never know for sure. But what is certain is that when Icelanders baked, they baked with purpose and a strong dose of personal pride. As you hitch up your cloak and prepare for the journey to Ingvellir, your younger brother scampers up. Can I come? You pause, then hand him a sample loaf. Only if you do not eat it. He nods solemnly, tucks it under his tunic like treasure. Your family's future might just rest on this slightly overbaked circle of barley and moss. The road to Ingvellir is long, stony, and treacherous. You walk along ancient sheep paths worn deep into the earth, the wind constantly trying to push you back. But you are not alone. Others are on the move, farmers, chieftains, petty criminals, and busybodies, wrapped in wool cloaks and carrying everything from legal documents to jars of fermented shark. You nod politely, though your thoughts are glued to one thing: bread. Specifically, your bread. More specifically, how that swindler Egil somehow managed to bake a version of it that smells unnervingly similar to yours. Earthy, toasty, with that telltale hint of seaweed and smoked fat. That combination took your grandmother 5 winters to perfect. And in Iceland, where even grain is a guest in the house, recipes are worth their weight in silver. See, Iceland is not exactly grain country. The soil is volcanic, the weather grimly unpredictable, and most farming is geared toward livestock, especially sheep. Grain had to be imported, often from Norway, in sporadic shipments that were expensive, late, or both. Most households could only afford barley, and even that got stretched with fillers like tree bark, moss, ground lichen, or dried fish meal. Delicious? No functional? Yes, sort of. A mainstream historical fact here. Barley was the dominant cereal crop in early medieval Iceland, but it was never grown in abundance. Archaeological digs at farmsteads have found only traces of barley pollen in fields, indicating just how small-scale and fragile grain cultivation really was. But here is the fringe tidbit. Some households swore by baking dough wrapped in seaweed to trap moisture and infuse a salty umami flavor. It also, conveniently, masked the taste of stale or slightly moldy flour. It is debatable whether this was creative cuisine or pure desperation. Honestly, probably both. You recall a winter 3 years ago when your family ran out of flour entirely. Your mother baked something called stone cakes, a mix of meshed fish, crushed bones, and moss, fried on hot rocks. You ate them with grim pride. So when someone manages to bake a proper barley loaf, crusty and golden, and worse, sell it for a profit using what smells like your seaweed wrapping trick, that crosses the line from culinary coincidence into flat-out theft. As you walk, you rehearse your argument aloud. He took the idea. He knew we used seaweed. He copied it. You cannot just watch someone mix pine ash into their dough and call it your invention. Your little brother rolls his eyes. Maybe it just smells the same. You shoot him a look. If it smells the same, it is the same. In Velar looms ahead, a vast natural amphitheater carved by tectonic forces. It is a stunning place. Black cliffs rising like ancient judges, waterfalls murmuring in the distance, and the scent of turf fires already rising as hundreds of Icelanders pitch tents and prepare to litigate. But not everything here is high-minded law. There are stalls selling fermented foods, makeshift inns offering sour beer, and entertainers juggling sheep skulls. One man is shouting about a new kind of fermented whey. Another is reciting insult poetry while hopping on one foot. You pass a small group arguing loudly over bread consistency. One man slaps a flatbread in his hand like a pancake. If it folds, it is not bread, he insists. His opponent, older and possibly already drunk, retorts, bread is what keeps you alive, not what keeps shape. You quietly agree with both, which is confusing. Historians still argue whether these recipe disputes were rooted in actual copyright-style concerns, or if they were just excuses to drag someone's name through the volcanic mud. One theory: Icelanders used food feuds as safe, socially accepted ways to challenge each other's honor without resorting to violence. Another theory? They just really, really hated sharing. You arrive at your family's camp, set up near the edge of a lava field. Your father is already in talks with a law speaker, a tall man in sealskin, reciting legal codes from memory as casually as someone reciting yesterday's sheep count. You wait your turn. This is your first time presenting a grievance. Your palms are sweating. When the law speaker looks at you, you step forward and bow your head. I claim that my neighbor Egil Thorfinnsson has stolen a family recipe, specifically a baking technique involving dried kelp infusion and smoking the loaf with sheep fat coals. I assert that he sells this bread at the local market, passing it off as his own creation. I seek damages in grain or livestock equivalent to one season's bread earnings. The law speaker raises an eyebrow. Do you have the loaf? You offer him the sample, wrapped in lambskin. He sniffs it, breaks it, chews. Then he grimaces, bit salty. That is the seaweed. He nods slowly. Bring Egil's version tomorrow. Your brother groans. We have to buy his bread? You say. We are investing in justice. That night, you sit by the campfire listening to someone recite Nargel's saga. The hero in that story also sued his neighbors over a different issue, burning his house down, but still, precedent is precedent. You think about how food, more than anything, survives winter, outlasts grudges, and if Egil really did copy your bread, your memory, your family's leanest years, your grandmother's song sung over dough, that is not just theft, that is erasure. You close your eyes, fire popping beside you, and dream of a courtroom made of stones, where loaves speak louder than words. Morning in Invellir begins early. The cold creeps into your bones before the sun even touches the horizon. Somewhere nearby, someone's already boiling fish heads for breakfast, and the smell hits you like an open-handed slap. You stretch beneath your wool cloak, brushing flakes of frost off your sleeves, and steel yourself for what comes next. Buying Egil's treacherous bread, you head toward the market circle, a rough ring of animal hides, wooden carts, and loud opinions. Someone's shouting about a goat that can predict avalanches. Someone else is selling socks made from dog hair. You push through until you spot Egil's stall, simple, smug, and unfortunately popular. There he is, Egil Thorfinnsson, in the flour, dusted flesh. He is taller than you remember, his beard a little too well kept for someone who claims to bake everything himself. And right there on his table, 3 neatly wrapped loaves, still warm with that exact aroma, a whisper of the sea, the tang of sheep smoke, the texture of home. You grit your teeth and hold out a few coins. Egil glances up, his eyes widen just a fraction when he recognizes you. Then he smirks. Well, if it is not the master baker's apprentice, you do not dignify that with a response. You just take the loaf, nod stiffly, and march back through the crowd, resisting the urge to hurl it into the nearest puddle. Back at camp, your father cuts the loaf carefully, slicing it next to your family's version. The comparison is annoyingly close. The texture is nearly identical. The crust may be a little more golden. The flavor? Side by side, it is nearly indistinguishable. Even your brother mumbles, "It is kind of good." You glare at him. A law speaker arrives late in the morning, bundled in wool, carrying a goatskin notebook and a head full of legal verses. You present both loaves. He smells, tears, tastes, chews slowly, then speaks. They are alike, not the same, but alike. You feel your stomach drop. Your father leans forward. Alike enough to be deliberate? The law speaker's brow furrows. Possibly. The method of smoking is similar. The use of seaweed. Uncommon, but not unheard of. It depends on whether Egil had prior knowledge of your process. And just like that, the burden of proof shifts. You are no longer arguing about bread. You are arguing about access, intent, and memory. You need to prove that Egil saw your family bake it, or that he admitted the influence, or that his version is close enough to yours that coincidence becomes absurd. This is where it gets tricky. Icelandic law in this period is more oral tradition than codified rigidity. Yes, there is the Gurges, and yes, there are chieftains and legal counselors, but a lot of decisions boil down to community opinion, witness accounts, and who can perform their argument better. You gather your witnesses, your mother, obviously, a neighbor who once traded eggs for your bread, even your old aunt, who claims Egil once sniffed around your hearth, looking suspiciously observant. Egil, for his part, produces a friend who says they invented the recipe together, a lie so bold it nearly deserves applause. He also points out that seaweed grows everywhere, that smoking loaves is hardly a unique idea, that people often arrive at the same solution when faced with the same problems, which, annoyingly, is sometimes true. Historians still argue whether Icelanders really believed in intellectual property or if their legal system was simply more concerned with reputation than invention. In some sagas, honor trumps ownership. In others, theft of ideas, especially profitable ones, leads to lasting feuds, outlawry, or worse. One quirky but telling story involves a man who claimed to invent a new cheese curdling method, only for his cousin to start using it at market. Instead of suing, he challenged him to a poetry duel. The winner got to keep the recipe and insult the loser's beard for 30 consecutive verses. That is one way to handle conflict. Your case, however, is not about rhymes. It is about facts, or at least convincing impressions of them. The law speaker announces that formal testimony will be heard that evening. You retreat to your tent and begin crafting your argument like you would a poem. Not too emotional, but passionate. Not too technical, but precise. You must make the case that your family's technique is more than habit. It is heritage. That Egil's bread is not just similar, but stolen. And that letting it slide would invite chaos, mistrust, and worst of all, bad baking. As dusk paints in valor and shadow and gold, you stand before the gathered crowd. Around you, murmurs, the scent of fires, and the distant bleating of someone's escaped goat. You speak clearly, evenly. My family's bread has been the same since before I was born. We use dried seaweed for flavor and moisture. We smoke it with sheep fat coals. We do not write the recipe. We live it. Egil Thorfinnsson has never baked this way until this winter. He sells it. He profits from it. And he has never once acknowledged where it came from. You hold up the loaf. This is not coincidence. This is imitation. And imitation without credit is theft. Egil responds with a shrug and a smirk. We all use what is available. Seaweed grows. Smoke rises. Bread bakes. Are we to sue each other every time someone boils fish differently? There are chuckles in the crowd, but also some frowns. The law speaker says nothing yet. Instead, he asks the elders of the district, the older women and men, those known for their baking and their sharp tongues, to taste both loaves and deliver an opinion. It is not legally binding, but it is socially lethal. One old woman chews both loaves slowly. She nods toward yours. This one I know. This one I trust. Another snorts after tasting Egil's version. Too neat, like a foreigner made it. You are careful not to smile. Yet, the law speaker raises a hand. Final judgment tomorrow. You nod and return to your tent, your heart pounding. Nothing is certain, but momentum feels on your side. You glance at your brother. He is gnawing on a crust. Did you eat the sample loaf? He shrugs. Crumbs everywhere. Just the burnt end. You groan. If the verdict hinges on crust thickness, you are doomed. But for now, you lie back, wrap yourself in wool, and stare at the moonlit sky. This strange land where people freeze in May, sleep beside sheep, and sue over bread. It is maddening, but in its own way, it makes sense. In a place where survival depends on memory, skill, and community, ideas matter, maybe even more than gold. The morning of the judgment arrives cloaked in fog. Thick, silver mist hugs the valley, curling between lava rocks and tents, like some ancient spirit unsure whether to curse or bless the day. You step out into it, clutching a warm cup of sour whey, your breath rising in puffs like lazy smoke. All around you, the camp is restless, people packing up, swapping gossip, and stretching after nights on hard turf. But no one seems more awake than you. You barely slept. Dreams of crumbling loaves and whispered accusations circled your mind all night, looping in ridiculous ways. At one point, Egil was a talking turnip. You try not to think about it too hard. You make your way back to the law circle, an open patch of flattened grass surrounded by stones, each one marking a speaker's stance. Today, the chieftains sit solemnly along the edge. Beside them, the law speaker, now draped in a heavier cloak, his face unreadable as always. You nod to your father, who grips your shoulder once, and then lets you walk forward alone. This is your case now, your bread, your voice. You are told to speak once more, this time briefly. You step into the circle, heart thudding behind your ribs like a knocking fist. Yesterday, I showed that the technique Egil uses did not come from his family or his land. I showed that my family has used seaweed smoking for years, through winters when flour was nearly gone. We do not seek silver, only recognition, and a fair price for what was taken. Egil steps forward lazily, biting into an apple like he is auditioning to be punched. I copied no one. I simply improved what I tasted. That is not theft. That is inspiration. You hear a low hiss from someone in the crowd, probably your aunt. The law speaker lifts a hand. We have heard the testimony. We have heard the elders' opinions. We now give the ruling. He pauses, long enough that a raven nearby gets in a full croak and flap. The court does not find sufficient proof that Egil stole the method. However, it does find strong probability of influence, and the elders agree that the loaf reflects a specific, known tradition. Therefore, the court grants the plaintiff's recognition of ownership for this technique and orders Egil to either cease its sale or offer fair compensation as defined by local trade values. There is a brief silence, then murmurs, then a surprised cheer from your brother, mostly. You just stand there, stunned. It is not full victory, but it is not loss. The technique is acknowledged. The bread is yours. Egil cannot sell it without paying. That, in Iceland, is the legal version of being smacked upside the head with a sheep femur. The chieftains rise. Judgments are over. Already, other complaints begin. Cows gone missing, marriage contracts broken, fish curing huts mysteriously burned down. You sit down on a rock, legs trembling slightly. Your father claps you on the back. You spoke well. Was it enough? You ask. He shrugs. No one here gets everything they want, but you got a lot. Egil walks past, pointedly not looking at you, his basket of now legally questionable loaves slung over his shoulder. You resist the urge to trip him. Barely. Historians still debate whether cases like yours were common or exceptional. On the one hand, Icelanders were fiercely protective of tradition, especially when it came to food, poems, and craft. On the other, many feuds were less about the issue and more about status. Winning in court raised your family's standing. Losing could tarnish your name for years. A fringe historical tidbit: there is evidence that some bread disputes were staged, yes, staged, as a kind of performance to boost market attention. Think of it as medieval marketing. Come taste the bread so good it caused a lawsuit. Honestly, you would try that loaf. The rest of the day blurs in post-trial exhaustion. You drink sour beer that tastes vaguely of pickled goat. You watch two men wrestle in a pit of moss. A woman recites a saga involving a cursed frying pan. It is all comfortingly ridiculous. That night, back at the tent, your family shares the last loaf, your loaf. You pass it around, tearing off warm pieces, dipping them in skyr. Your brother says he wants to invent a new stew. Your mother smiles and says only if it does not involve pine needles this time. You lie on your back again, listening to distant laughter, the crackle of a nearby fire, and the rustle of wind through kelp-strewn canvas. Ingvellir is a place of law, yes, but also of stories. And now, you have one of your own. One day, maybe, someone will sing of it. Maybe not a saga, exactly, but a bedtime story, told while bread bakes over coals and kids beg for one more bite. You close your eyes, full and satisfied, as the stars will overhead. You leave Ingvellir the next morning as mist peels off the ground like steam rising from the earth. The crowd thins slowly, each group packing up their wool blankets, slinging bags over ponies, muttering about who insulted whose goats. The legal season is over, and the path home is long, cold, and mostly uphill. But your stride is light. Somewhere behind you, Egil is probably still grumbling over smoked seaweed and pricing tables. That is a warm thought. On the trail, the silence returns quickly. After the noisy pulse of the assembly, the road back to your valley feels vast and oddly empty. Just hooves, wind, and the occasional crunch of old snow. But in that quiet, you start replaying everything. The argument, the way Egil's friend stammered, the way the old woman wrinkled her nose at his loaf like it had been baked in a troll's armpit. It hits you then. This was not just about bread. Not really. It was about survival, identity, the idea that even in a place with no kings, no castles, and barely enough firewood, your community still believes in protecting knowledge, not just swords and sheep and land, but the ways you do things, the little rituals passed from hand to hand, from grandmothers to grandchildren, the flavor of belonging. Still, the road is long, and your feet start aching. You and your brother take turns complaining about how dry the jerky is. At one point, you step in a puddle disguised as solid ground. You spend the next hour with one wet boot and the distinct sensation of freezing mud seeping into your soul. But you make it. Home. Your farm tucked between sharp hills and black stones. The smell of sheep and smoke already familiar again. The dog barks once and promptly resumes napping. You unload the pony, hang your cloak, and do the first thing anyone does after returning from Invalor. You bake. The hearth flares to life. The seaweed dries on its wreck. You crush it gently in your hands, fingers still stiff from the ride. You mix, knead, pat. The rhythm is comforting, like old songs you do not even realize you remember. Your mother watches, nodding once, saying nothing. That is approval enough. By dinner, the bread is done. Crisp outside, soft inside, with just that hint of ocean you have always known. You eat slowly, letting it settle in your stomach like a returning guest. Then, one of your cousins knocks on the door. She is soaked, wind-blown, eyes full of urgency. You have to see this. You glance at your father. He sighs and reaches for his cloak again. So much for a quiet evening. She leads you up the ridge to a flat patch of land overlooking the fjord. From there, you see it. A small camp set up on your neighbor's land. New tents, a cart, smoke rising from a cooking pit. At first, you think it is travelers, but then you smell it. Bread. Your father grimaces. Not again. You descend quickly. The camp is neat, the tents oiled, the cart full of sacks and tools. A man in a blue tunic is tending the fire. He does not look local. His accent, when he finally speaks, confirms it, southern, from the coast. "My name is Sklee," he says cheerfully. "I am here to trade, and perhaps to bake." He offers you a slice. Different from yours, lighter, sour, but similar in base. Seaweed, smoke, fat. Again. This time, your father handles the speaking. "You have tried this recipe before?" Sklee grins. "Oh, many in the South bake with seaweed now. It is becoming fashionable." You try not to squint. "Where did you learn it?" "Oh, from a merchant who said he learned it from a man at Ingvellir. Egil, I think. Tall. Excellent beard. You exhale loudly. There it is. The infection. Once the idea spreads, it spreads fast. Faster than you can sue, certainly. But here is the funny thing. You are not angry. Not really. Not this time. Because while Sklee's version is clever, it is not yours. It is missing something. Maybe it is the fire. Maybe it is the altitude. Maybe it is the way you pinch the dough just slightly at the end, sealing in the smoke. Maybe, just maybe, it is something they cannot copy. Historians still argue whether early Icelandic culture valued innovation or preservation more. Some claim the island's isolation made it naturally conservative. If something worked, you kept it exactly the same. Others point out that the sagas are full of clever workarounds, subtle tweaks, and characters praised not for doing what their father did, but for doing it better. And you? You are caught in the middle of that argument, kneeling by a stranger's fire, chewing on a decent imitation of your own bread, and wondering whether it is better to guard a recipe or teach it. Because here's the thing, the more people bake like you, the more valuable your version becomes. The original, the source. And while others may mimic the flavor, only you know the history. Only you remember the snowstorms that led to seaweed in the first place. Only you remember the winter your mother cried because the salt barrel cracked and you had to make do with driftwood ash. That kind of knowledge does not travel well in carts. So you do not yell at Sklee. You do not threaten to sue. Instead, you smile, nod, and return to your farm. Later that night, you write something down. Not a full recipe, just a few notes, ratios, hints, names. You tuck it into a carved wooden box and bury it under the hearthstone, where heat meets stone meets memory. You are not just baking anymore. You are archiving. The hearth becomes your quiet accomplice. Every time you stoke the coals or lift a pan from the flames, you think about that little box buried just beneath. You imagine some distant descendant discovering it. A curious child, perhaps, chasing a cat into the kitchen and lifting it out with soot-covered fingers, the smell of smoke and flour still clinging to the corners of your handwriting. But that is far off. For now, your valley stirs back into routine. Sheep wander into places they should not. Roofs need rethatching. A storm breaks a fence post, and your brother blames the gods. Life, basically. And yet, something has shifted. You're baking more often. People come by just to visit, and somehow always end up with warm loaves wrapped in cloth. A few start asking questions. How long do you smoke the seaweed? Where do you find the best kind? One woman tries to trade you 3 carved spoons for a lesson. You give her 2 pointers and keep the spoons. Then a letter arrives, delivered by a traveling scribe, one of those wiry types who walks like he is allergic to horses. The note is wax sealed and surprisingly polite. It is from a man named Arnie, based far to the east. He writes that he has heard of your baking method and wishes to learn more. He invites you to visit his home, share knowledge, and he writes this in an elegant loop. Further the culinary tapestry of our people. Your first thought is, wow, who says tapestry with a straight face? Your second thought is, why not? You make the trip a few weeks later. The ride east is brutal, long stretches of black sand, bitter wind that makes your ears feel detachable. But when you arrive, Arnie is waiting with a fire already lit and a steaming stew on the table. His wife is quiet. His children peek out from behind door frames like nervous owls. You are not sure what you expected. A kitchen full of bubbling vats? Secret shelves full of rare spices? No, it is a simple home like yours. But his oven is clever, dug into the wall with layered stones that retain heat better than any setup you have seen. You make a note of it. You both bake. You trade tricks. You teach him about layering dried kelp between barley folds. He shows you how he folds wild thyme into the crust. It is not competitive, not like with Egil. It is collaborative. For once, it does not feel like someone is trying to take from you. They are trying to build with you. You break bread together at dusk. Literally, the loaf steams as you tear it, and Arnie's son, barely taller than a bucket, declares it the best he has ever tasted. You feel oddly proud. A quirky historical tidbit. Some Icelandic households gave nicknames to their most successful loaves. Seriously, Whole Crispy, Midnight Crunch, or even Thor's Chew. These loaves were considered good luck charms and were sometimes buried under new homes or sheep pens to bring prosperity. Historians suspect it was equal parts humor and superstition. You consider naming your own. Maybe the Vengeance Crumb. The next morning, before you leave, Arnie offers you something unexpected. A small pouch of dried moss. From the high cliffs, he says. Soaked in goat's milk before baking. Adds a tang. You accept it like a gift from a wizard. On the ride home, you reflect on what has changed. Not just for you, but maybe for all of Iceland. These recipes, once locked in valleys and passed down by hand, are starting to move, travel, adapt. A recipe, you realize, is like a saga. It grows, twists, and picks up scars over time. Every baker adds their own footnote. Historians still argue whether this culinary exchange in medieval Iceland was widespread or mostly anecdotal. Some sagas mention traveling cooks and feasts, but hard evidence is slim. Others think recipes were highly localized, guarded like spells, lost when a family line ended or a farm collapsed into the sea. You return home, moss pouch in your pocket, and try a new version of the bread. Just a few sprinkles of the moss, nothing drastic. The result? Unexpectedly good, tangy, earthy, like licking a boulder, but in a good way. You do not write this one down. Some things, you decide, must remain in the hands, but you share it with your family and later with two neighbors. The circle grows. You teach a boy how to feed the fire properly. You teach a girl how to roll the dough without flattening the spirit out of it. One night, while eating a slightly burnt loaf, your mother sighs and says, "You know, you might be starting a school." You laugh. "For bread?" She nods. What better thing to teach? You think about that. A school without walls. Just warm ovens, calloused hands, and people curious enough to ask questions. You might not own the technique forever, but if you teach it right, maybe no one ever truly owns it again. It becomes part of the land, the way moss becomes soil, the way stories become lullabies. You stare into the hearth, embers blinking like tiny, sleepy eyes, a school of warmth, of crumbs and memory. And somewhere, in a tent far away, Egil sneezes violently while chewing something suspiciously smoky. Good. The wind moans against your roof again, and you start to notice. It has a pattern, almost like a chant, as if the land itself is whispering old secrets, maybe even bread recipes that drifted off into the cold long before ink and vellum could catch them. You sit by the fire, hands resting on your knees, the moss pouch still tucked nearby like a tiny talisman. It is funny, really, how something as small as crushed seaweed and smoked flour could pull you into a web of people, places, and politics. Because it is not just loaves anymore. A new face arrives on your land. A young man with calluses from hauling nets, smelling of salt and fish oil, says he has heard you are the one to learn from. You raise an eyebrow, but invite him in. He calls himself Leaf. Not that Leaf, the famous explorer, is just a boy somewhere, still figuring out which end of the sword is pointy. But this Leaf is hungry to learn. So you teach him. Sort of. You make him sweep first. Clean the ashes, sort the dried herbs from the not-so-dried spiders. He does it without complaining. Well, mostly, you grow fond of his determination and his awful jokes. He makes mistakes. Once, he confuses dried moss with goat droppings. That batch gets fed to the chickens who refuse to eat it and glare at you for hours. You declare it an experimental failure and give the chickens extra grain as apology. But then he surprises you. He mixes driftwood ash into the dough, just a pinch, and it gives the crust a depth you did not expect. Smoky, mysterious. You raise an eyebrow and say, "You trying to upstage me?" He grins. Only a little. Mainstream historical records confirm that Icelandic women did most of the baking in medieval households, but some male cooks, especially those traveling or connected to monastic life, were known to develop their own niche methods. There is even a poem fragment that mentions a monk famous for his crunchy sea cakes, though whether those were delicious or just tragically overbaked remains a mystery. Your student, your not-so-student, is catching on faster than you expected. And then things take a twist. A man shows up with a complaint, not about fences, or sheep, or someone's cow breaking wind too loudly during Mass. No, he claims that Leaf has sold a loaf in the next valley. And not just any loaf. Your loaf, the smoky one, the moss-touched one, the taste that had taken seasons of trial and error, bruised knuckles, and more ash-covered bread than you care to admit. You invite Leaf inside. Sit him down. He confesses, not guiltily, exactly, more sheepishly. He says he used the bread to barter for a new axe head, something better than the one he had been using that chipped on a stone. He says it worked. The man took one bite and said, "This is worth steel." You do not yell. You do not toss him out. But you do look at the hearth and then at your hands, because suddenly the heat feels less comforting and more fragile. Historians still argue whether early Icelandic lawsuits over food were practical matters of theft or more symbolic challenges to status, family honor, or even subtle political moves. There are recorded cases of farmers suing not because they truly believed their goat cheese had been copied, but because it gave them leverage in another dispute. Bread, it seems, was often the tip of the iceberg. You send word to the local speaker, not to sue, not yet, but to talk. A meeting is arranged. You and Leaf ride out together, in silence mostly, except for when he tries to tell a joke about why bakers never make good warriors, because they always crumble under pressure. You do not laugh. Not this time. The meeting takes place in a longhouse owned by a respected elder, the kind of man who trims his beard with a knife sharp enough to split a hair, and who once settled a fight over sheep by making both parties wrestle in butter. That kind of elder. He listens to both sides. Leaf explains what he did. You explain what it meant. The elder nods a lot, sips from his wooden cup. Finally, he asks one question. What is a recipe worth? Not how much it costs, not what it tastes like, but what it means. You think for a moment. Then you say, it is the memory of famine and the whisper of survival. It is my mother's hands and my cousin's laughter and the cold nights we spent trying to find something, anything, to eat. It is more than food. Leaf nods slowly. The elder declares no punishment, but he advises Leaf to stay and keep learning under you, not next to you. He calls it bread apprenticeship, which sounds ridiculous, but sticks. You ride home through the mist. Leaf unusually quiet. You glance at him once, and he says, I was just proud of it. I did not think. You interrupt him. Next time, think. But the next day, you show him how to dry the seaweed faster by stacking stones around the fire in a certain pattern. It is not forgiveness, but it is a start. That week, you create a new version, a blend of thyme, moss, and toasted barley soaked in broth. The crust crackles like stepping on thin ice. You let Leaf name it. He calls it peace loaf. You roll your eyes, but write it down anyway. Somewhere far off, more people are baking like you. Imitations, variations, evolutions. You cannot stop it, but maybe you do not have to, because what you teach with your hands, that stays yours. No matter how far the recipe travels, you start waking up before dawn again. Not out of anxiety this time, but anticipation. The dark hours are quiet, still. Just you, the hiss of embers, and a kitchen filled with the ghost of yeast rising. There is something comforting about being ahead of the sun, as if you get to greet the day on your terms. Leaf begins showing up earlier too, wiping sleep from his eyes with the back of his sleeve, carrying fresh water from the stream. You do not ask him to. He just does it. His loaves are getting better, less dense, less confused. He finally understands that kneading is more than just mashing. It is rhythm, breath, a kind of conversation with the dough. You do not say you are proud. He knows. But word continues to spread, not just about you, but about the idea that bread can be more than filler food, that it can carry a name, a memory, even a reputation. And reputation, in Iceland, is currency. One day, another messenger arrives. This one is older, with a crooked back and a voice like gravel poured through honey. He carries an invitation from a chieftain named Brander. You have heard of him. Landholder, sheep magnate, a man who once outlawed his neighbor over fermented seal blubber, or so the stories go. He is hosting a feast, and he wants you to bring the bread. Not just any bread either. He names it the smoked moss loaf. You have a flash of suspicion. How does he know about that one? Leaf shrugs. Maybe a bird told him. Did you tell him? He does not answer. Brander's feast is only a few weeks away. Word is, he is expecting at least 30 guests, maybe more. Some from as far as the fjords in the north. People with long beards and longer memories. You do not trust Brander, but you know this is not the kind of invitation you can refuse without raising eyebrows and lawsuits. So you prepare. You triple your moss drying, double the seaweed harvest, borrow baking stones from 3 different families. At one point, your house smells like someone grilled a swamp. You stop noticing. A quirky historical note. It was not unusual for medieval Icelanders to receive or demand specific dishes from guests at feasts. If a person was known for their ale or their dried fish preparation, they might be gently pressured to bring enough to share. Refusing could damage your honor or invite poetic mockery in the form of rude verses whispered during dinner. You make 32 loaves, each one as close to perfect as possible. You pack them in moss-lined crates and wrap them in oiled cloth. You and Leaf load the horses. Then you ride. Brander's homestead is perched on a ridge above a sharp valley, wind-racked and full of sheep that stare at you like they know things. His longhouse is impressive, longer than your entire field. Smoke curls from 2 chimneys. The door creaks open before you knock. Brander is exactly what you expect. Tall, gray-bearded, and smug in a way that makes you want to salt his porridge with nettles. But he is polite. For now, he greets you with a grin and a comment about how the smell arrived before you did. You smile thinly. Inside, the feast is already beginning. Smoked fish, boiled lamb, stewed berries, all laid out like an edible saga. People laugh, pass horns of ale, and try to guess what the surprise loaf will be. You begin to sweat. You wait until just the right moment, when silence falls between the main course and dessert, and then you unveil the loaves. One by one, steam rises like a holy offering. The scent is unmistakable, smoky, herbal, haunting. They eat. At first, they chew in silence. Then, murmurs. Then, actual murmurs of approval. One woman gasps. A child asks if they are allowed to take another piece. Brander chews slowly, then leans back, arms crossed. He calls it unusual, then impressive, then finally leans in and whispers, "I want the recipe." Your spine stiffens. You knew this was coming. You shake your head politely. It is not written. He smiles like a man used to getting his way. Then speak it. You deflect. Say it is not so simple, that it is in the method, not the words. He waves a hand, says he will pay, offers a horse, then a silver ring. Leaf looks at you. You shake your head again. Brander's smile drops. You came here to impress, he says. Do not pretend it was not a performance. You nod. It was. not a transaction. He frowns, but lets it go. For now. But 2 days later, back at your farm, the summons arrives. He has filed a suit. Yes, over bread. Specifically, he accuses you of withholding culturally significant knowledge that could benefit the broader community. That is the phrasing. Sounds noble, right? But you know better. He wants the prestige of owning the next great recipe. And this is where Iceland gets weird. Because while the Althing, the Great General Assembly, did oversee everything from land disputes to murder charges, it also handled honor challenges. If a chieftain claimed your words or actions injured his status, he could take you to court for damaging reputation through knowledge hoarding. It was not common, but it was real. Historians still argue whether these cases were ever enforced with real punishments, or if they mostly ended in fines, public recitations, or ritual apologies. The records are sparse, but the idea alone? That was power. You now face the possibility of defending a loaf in court. You look at Leaf, who is speechless for once. You exhale. Guess we better start practicing our lines. You find yourself pacing the edge of the farmyard, the evening breeze tugging at your cloak like it knows you are unsettled. A bread dispute in court. Who would have thought? But this is Iceland, where even the smallest crumb can crumble into a saga of honor and law. Your neighbors gather quietly, murmuring about Brander's claim. Some think it's absurd. Others see it as the latest chapter in an endless game of power plays. You notice how the village children stop by more often, eyes wide, as if they expect you to turn your hearth into a courtroom. The Althing is not just a place. It is an idea. Every year, chieftains, farmers, and sometimes even poets gather on the plains near Invellir to settle disputes, pass laws, and gossip fiercely about each other. You picture the great open-air arena with wooden benches and fiery speeches, where bread might be just one of many things on trial. You prepare yourself for the trip. You polish your boots, though the mud outside insists on sticking, pack a few loaves just in case, and write down your version of the story. Not the recipe, of course. That remains secret, tucked away like a treasure map with no X. The day of the hearing arrives faster than expected. You ride alongside Leaf, who is nervously fiddling with a small loaf he baked himself. You tell him to stop. It's not for eating. It's for showing you're serious. At the Althing, the crowd is thick. You feel like a salmon swimming upstream through voices, laughter, and the occasional shouting match over fishing rights. The loudspeaker calls the assembly to order with a booming voice. And suddenly, it's all very real. Brander stands opposite you, looking every bit the chieftain with his fur cloak and sharp glare. He is flanked by his men, who nod in approval every time he speaks. You swallow a lump in your throat and step forward. The case is presented. Brander claims you are hoarding a recipe that could unify farmers, strengthen alliances, and enrich the land. You, on the other hand, argue that recipes are not mere commodities to be handed over like livestock or land deeds. They are living things, shaped by hands, by hearths, by years of trial and error. Sharing is important, but it must be done on trust, not command. You watch faces around you. Some nod, Others frown. A last speaker strokes his beard thoughtfully. He asks a question you did not expect. Is there precedent for such a dispute? You shake your head. To your knowledge, this is the first case of its kind. Historians still argue whether medieval Icelandic law really addressed intangible things like recipes or knowledge. Some scholars believe the legal system was flexible enough to cover such matters, while others think it was strictly focused on physical property and personal honor. The assembly debates. Voices rise and fall like waves. Some say Brander's demand is just and forward-thinking. Sharing knowledge benefits all. Others warn that forcing someone to reveal a recipe is like forcing a poet to give up their verses or a smith to hand over their secrets. You catch Leif's eye. He looks both scared and hopeful. After hours of back and forth, the last speaker makes a ruling. No, you will not be forced to hand over your recipe, but Brander is granted permission to learn from you under certain conditions, an apprenticeship with clear limits on what can be shared and when. The crowd murmurs approval. You exhale deeply. It is not a total victory, but it is something. As you leave, you overhear a merchant whisper about bread diplomacy, a term that makes you smile despite the tension. You ride home slower than usual, the weight of judgment heavy, but strangely liberating. You think about the ovens, the moss, the seaweed, and about how something so simple has sparked a debate far bigger than you ever imagined. And in the quiet of the night, you decide that sharing knowledge, like baking bread, is a delicate balance, a mix of openness and protection, warmth and restraint. You also decide to teach Leif that joke about bakers and warriors again, because sometimes laughter is the best crust. You return to your hearth with a new kind of quiet, the kind that settles after storms, when the wind finally stops yanking at the roof and the fire's glow feels warmer than before. You realize something. This whole ordeal, this strange court case over bread, has changed something inside you. The moss-streaked crust of your loaves carries more now, a story, a reputation, a lesson. Leif is waiting, pacing nervously by the fire. You catch his eyes and nod. We're not out of the woods yet. He swallows hard. But there's a spark there, something like determination mixed with relief. You both know that Brander's chieftain ambitions won't be easily satisfied. You spend the next days teaching Leif the nuances of your craft, how the flour needs to be milled just so, too fine, and it loses character, too coarse, and the bread becomes dense and dull. How the timing of kneading matters, like a slow dance between you and the dough. You show him the secret touch of seaweed ash, which isn't just for taste, but for texture and color. You both laugh when Leif accidentally uses salt instead of sugar, grimacing as the dough puckers in protest. I'm ruined, he says, mock dramatically. Send me to the wolves. No wolves here, you say, just the bread police. You joke, but it lightens the mood. Outside, the village buzzes with news. Someone swears they saw Brander's men sniffing around your barn at odd hours. Another says he's trying to recruit new bakers with promises of gold and land. It feels like you're at the center of a slow-moving storm. There is an odd charm in all of this. A reminder that even in a harsh place like medieval Iceland, food connects you to others. It is a language, a bargaining chip, a way of saying, I see you, and I respect you. But it is also a battlefield. The history books tell us that food-related disputes were surprisingly common in medieval Iceland. Not just bread, but fish, dairy, and even honey sparked arguments. Sometimes these escalated into poetry battles, where insults were woven into verses sharp enough to wound a reputation more than a sword ever could. One particularly eccentric detail from the sagas mentions a man who sued his neighbor over the theft of his smoked fish recipe and lost because the judge thought his technique was too complicated to be considered common knowledge. It's a reminder that the law, much like bread, is often a matter of interpretation. The days blur into weeks. You and Leaf experiment with new recipes, sometimes inspired by guests, other times by sheer boredom. You add wild herbs, dried berries, and sometimes even a pinch of ground sea urchin shells. It sounds strange, but the crunch adds an unexpected delight. Brander does not give up. He invites you to a feast again, this time with a softer tone. You bring peace loaf and a new creation, a sweet rye bread with honey glaze. The guests are intrigued, and the chieftain even compliments you in front of the crowd. Yet, beneath the surface, you know this is not just about bread. It is about power, pride, and the fragile balance of community. You find yourself wondering, who really owns a recipe? Is it the baker who created it? The land that nurtured the ingredients? Or the people who keep the tradition alive? Historians still debate whether medieval Icelandic culture emphasized communal knowledge sharing or fierce individual ownership of crafts. Some argue that recipes were family secrets passed quietly through generations, while others believe that innovation was openly celebrated and copied. You realize there is no single answer. What matters is the story, your story, and the way a simple loaf can carry the weight of history, honor, and even justice. You smile at Leaf as he pulls a fresh batch from the oven, the smell promising another chapter in your bread saga. Ready for the next round? You ask. He grins, always. The seasons shift, as if they are part of some slow, inevitable rhythm choreographed by unseen hands. Snow melts, revealing the patchy grass and wildflowers beneath. You can almost taste the change in the air, a cleaner, sharper note that makes you want to dig your hands into flour and start again. Word spreads beyond your village, reaching distant farms and fjords where Iceland's rugged people wrestle with the same harsh elements you do. The idea of recipe ownership, of bread as a kind of cultural treasure, takes root in conversations beside fires and in the clatter of wooden bowls. You begin receiving unexpected visitors, farmers, traders, even a wandering skald who claims he can craft verses about bread so good they will bring tears to your eyes. He shows up at odd hours, just as you're closing the door or lighting the oven, with an eager grin and a notebook full of scribbled lines. It strikes you how bread, usually something simple and everyday, has transformed into a symbol, a stand-in for identity, tradition, and even defiance. This sparks memories of another quirky Icelandic tale you once heard, that of a fisherman who sued because a rival claimed to have stolen his fish stew recipe. The case apparently dissolved into such absurdity that the judge ordered the two men to settle by cooking the stew together. A reminder, maybe, that food can heal as well as divide. At the same time, Brander's shadow lingers. His offers grow more generous and his visits more frequent. Each time, he wants a taste, a hint, or just to hear how your dough sings in the oven. You realize this is no longer about bread alone. It is about control over culture, over reputation, over you. Leaf watches quietly. He suggests learning not just to bake, but to read the political currents swirling around you. Sometimes the oven isn't the only heat you need to worry about, he says, eyes narrowing. You nod, realizing that baking and politics are more intertwined than you thought. Just like the moss in your bread, which adds a subtle flavor no one else can replicate. Your knowledge is something both nourishing and fiercely protected. You begin attending gatherings beyond the althing, small councils, informal meetings, even secretive gatherings of bakers and farmers where ideas about recipes, trade, and ownership are debated with surprising passion. You listen more than you speak, learning the unwritten rules and observing who holds power like a sharp knife behind their back. And open scholarly debate circles around the idea that medieval Iceland's relative isolation and small communities both limited and encouraged the sharing of recipes. On one hand, survival depended on cooperation. On the other, prestige and honor demanded exclusivity. One night, as you share bread and ale with a group of local women skilled in preservation and herbal knowledge, you realize something. Bread is just one piece of a larger puzzle, a way to build alliances and tell stories. It is a living tradition as changeable as the landscape itself. You start experimenting with new forms of bread, infused with herbs, seeds, and even a touch of reindeer moss. The smell of fresh baking begins to attract more visitors, each one bringing a new story, a new technique, or a new challenge. Among them is a young woman named Freydis, who claims her family's rye bread recipe is the oldest in the region. She's fierce, clever, and a bit mysterious. She challenges you, not just in baking, but in conversation and wit. You recognize a kindred spirit, and your rivalry quickly turns into collaboration. Together, you discuss how recipes evolve, how they are guarded and shared, and what it means to hold a tradition alive. The saga of bread continues, with new voices and new twists. And you, standing by the oven's warmth, realize that the true power of a recipe lies not in possession, but in the stories it carries and the people it brings together. You wake to a sky painted with soft pinks and blues, the cool morning air carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and damp earth. Outside, the village stirs slowly, chickens clucking, dogs barking, the occasional shout from a distant farmstead. You take a deep breath, the kind that fills your lungs with calm and purpose. Today, something feels different. News has reached you that the Althing is convening again, this time to discuss a new wave of disputes, some over land, others over livestock, and now more stories about food. Bread disputes, fish disputes, honey disputes. like an unexpected food festival of legal arguments. You hear murmurs about a new petition. A group of farmers wants to formalize ownership of recipes to protect their family's secrets from wandering bakers and ambitious chieftains. It is a bold move, one that could reshape the unwritten rules you've been navigating. You think back to your own case, how it felt like stepping onto a thin crust of ice. One false move, and everything might crack. But it also reminded you of something else, how stories and traditions are more than just property. They are bonds. Freydis arrives at your door just as you finish kneading dough, her eyes bright, and her expression unreadable. She carries a small bundle wrapped in cloth, her family's ancient recipe scroll, or so she says. You unfold it carefully, the faded ink tracing a lineage you can almost taste. Together, you pore over the script, tracing flour-dusted fingers over old words and curious symbols. It is a reminder that recipes, like history itself, are fragile. They require care, understanding, and respect. You decide to attend the Althing again, this time not as a defendant, but as a witness, someone who has lived through the strange intersection of bread and law. As you walk across the fields toward the assembly site, the crunch of gravel underfoot mixes with your thoughts. The debates are fierce. Some chieftains argue that recipes should be property, just like land or cattle, to protect investment and encourage innovation. Others warn that such formalization risks strangling tradition and community sharing. You notice the last speaker, his face lined and thoughtful, listening intently. He asks questions that echo your own doubts. Can a recipe truly be owned? How does one measure the worth of a loaf? What happens when the recipe is passed down orally or altered slightly by each baker? Historians still argue whether such legal codifications existed at all, or if these disputes were simply an extension of broader property conflicts dressed up in flour and yeast. After hours of heated discussion, the assembly votes to establish guidelines that recognize both individual creativity and communal heritage. Recipes will be protected, but there will be allowances for sharing and adaptation, so long as credit is given. You find yourself quietly relieved. It is not perfect, but it reflects the messy reality you have come to understand, a balance between guarding tradition and embracing change. As the sun sets, you sit by the fire with Freydis and Leaf, breaking bread and sharing stories. You realize how this ancient struggle over something as simple as bread is, in fact, a story about people, about community, identity, and the ties that bind us across time. Outside, the stars begin to blink awake, their cold light a reminder of the vastness beyond your village. But here, in the warmth of the hearth, the saga of bread and law continues, a quiet dance of crust and crumb that shapes the lives of all who gather around. The frost has crept back, coating the fields in a silvery glaze that crunches underfoot as you step outside. The cold seeps through your cloak, but the thought of warm bread waiting for you at home stokes a fire inside. This season, like all before it, reminds you how much your daily life hinges on patience and resilience, qualities as essential as yeast and dough. Village gossip carries new twists. Brander's ambitions haven't cooled, Rumors say he's hiring a foreign baker rumored to carry forbidden recipes from distant lands. The idea makes you uneasy. You wonder what new flavors or techniques might disrupt the delicate balance of tradition and innovation here. Leaf, ever curious, brings you tales from traders who've traveled to Norway, England, and even the far reaches of the Mediterranean. They speak of bread spiced with exotic seeds, or baked in ovens shaped like giant clamshells. You listen fascinated, imagining how those distant flavors might mingle with the moss and seaweed you know so well. This blend of local tradition and foreign influence sparks debates in your mind. Should you preserve the purity of your ancestral recipes, or embrace change and evolution? The question is not just culinary, but deeply personal. You spend evenings experimenting, folding new spices into dough, adjusting baking times, and tasting results with a scientist's curiosity and an artist's heart. Some loaves delight, others flop spectacularly, leaving you with tough crusts and crumbly middles. You laugh at your failures, knowing that every mistake is a lesson baked in. Meanwhile, the All Things New guidelines about recipe ownership begin to shape village life. Some bakers fiercely protect their secrets, while others share freely, creating a lively market of ideas and tastes. The tension between tradition and progress plays out as vividly as any saga. You recall a quirky historical tidbit. In one Icelandic saga, a baker's apprentice was accused of stealing a recipe by disguising himself as a ghost. The trial involved witnesses swearing on sacred oaths and ended with the apprentice's banishment. It sounds like something out of a fairy tale, but it underscores how seriously these matters were taken. Historians still debate whether such supernatural accusations were common or rare exceptions, reflecting societal fears rather than legal norms. But they certainly add color to the rich tapestry of Icelandic cultural history. As the winter deepens, you find comfort in the steady rhythm of baking. Flour dust dances in the firelight, mixing with the scent of burning peat. You think about how bread is more than food. It is ritual, identity, and a link between past and future. One evening, Freydis surprises you with a gift, a jar of honey infused with wild herbs. She insists you try it drizzled on a warm loaf. The combination is unexpected and delightful, a metaphor for your evolving relationship with tradition. Outside, the northern lights shimmer faintly, ribbons of green and purple weaving across the night sky. You imagine your saga of bread and law joining those ancient lights, a story both timeless and fleeting, baked into the soul of the land. Spring edges its way into the landscape, coaxing life back into the fields and forests. You notice the way the first crocuses push through the last patches of snow, their purple petals bright against the fading white. The air grows warmer, but the scent of burning wood still lingers, reminding you that winter's grip loosens slowly in this northern world. The village feels different now, charged with new energy and cautious optimism. You see it in the faces of farmers planting their crops, in the hurried footsteps of traders bringing fresh goods from distant ports, and in the soft hum of conversations about change. You continue to refine your bread, inspired by the season's renewal. You incorporate wild herbs thyme, sorrel, and even a pinch of mountain angelica, infusing your loaves with flavors that feel both ancient and fresh. Your kitchen becomes a lab where tradition meets experimentation, where recipes evolve like living organisms. At the Althing, discussions about recipe ownership grow more complex. New voices join the debate: women, younger farmers, even traveling merchants. They argue about who gets to claim credit for recipes that are often borrowed, adapted, or inspired by shared customs. You attend a gathering where a fiery young woman challenges the old guard. She insists that recipes are communal gifts, not private property, and warns that legal restrictions could stifle creativity and threaten the very culture they aim to protect. Her words echo in your mind. You realize that the tension between preservation and innovation is not unique to bread. It is a question every society wrestles with. A quirky note surfaces from the past. Some medieval Icelanders believed that certain breads had magical properties, protection against evil spirits, or the power to bring good luck in battle. You chuckle, imagining hardened warriors nervously clutching a loaf like a talisman. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were widespread or limited to folklore, but they highlight how intertwined food and culture truly were. Meanwhile, Brander's presence in the village remains a shadow just at the edge of your awareness. His attempts to influence bakers and traders grow more subtle, like a slow tide pulling at the shore. You keep one eye open, knowing that power games often disguise themselves in the gentlest of guises. Freydis, and you continue to exchange ideas and stories. You marvel at how something as simple as bread can open doors to friendships, alliances, and unexpected adventures. It reminds you that food is a universal language, one that can build bridges or burn them down. One evening, as you break bread together, you reflect on how far you have come since that first heated court case. You wonder what future generations will say about these moments, whether they will see them as the start of a new tradition or just another chapter in an ongoing saga. Outside, the long Icelandic twilight stretches out, soft and endless. You let your thoughts drift like the slow-moving clouds overhead, knowing that your story, like the bread you bake, will continue to rise and change with time. The village awakens to the steady drum of rain tapping against the roofs, a sound both soothing and insistent. You pull your cloak tighter and step outside, the earth beneath your boots soft and slightly muddy. It is a reminder that even in this rugged place, the elements shape every aspect of life, including bread. Rain means fresh grain will swell in the fields, but it also complicates the drying and storage processes crucial for baking. You watch farmers working diligently to harvest and protect their crops, their faces a study in focus and fatigue. You too feel the weight of responsibility. The bread you bake is more than nourishment. It is a symbol of survival, identity, and sometimes contention. You recall the long disputes over flour quality and water sources that once nearly tore your community apart. One evening, as you knead dough beneath the flickering firelight, you hear a knock on the door. It is a messenger, breathless and muddy, bearing news from a neighboring district. A new dispute has erupted over honey recipes. Apparently, A beekeeper accused another of copying his secret blend of herbs added to the honeycomb. He laughed softly. It seems the saga of recipe ownership is far from over. In fact, it is spreading like a slow-burning wildfire, touching every corner of Icelandic life. This reminds you of a strange historical tidbit. Some medieval Icelanders believed that stealing a recipe was almost as serious as stealing livestock, punishable by fines or even exile. This raises questions about the cultural importance of culinary knowledge, far beyond what we might expect. Historians still debate whether these penalties were strictly enforced or mostly symbolic, but the fact remains that recipes carried weight, legal, social, and emotional. You meet with Freydis and Leif to discuss what this means for you and your village. The three of you strategize ways to protect your traditions while fostering community spirit. Your conversations turn philosophical. Who owns a recipe? The creator? The land? The people who carry the tradition forward? These questions echo across time, just as they do in your small kitchen, with flour-dusted hands and hopeful hearts. Outside, the rain slows, and the scent of wet earth rises. You let the moment linger, grateful for the warmth of the hearth, the companionship of friends, and the simple comfort of bread, imperfect, evolving, and utterly human. The landscape transforms yet again as the first hints of summer creep into the valleys, bringing longer days and the soft hum of insects returning from their winter silence. You step outside early, the crisp morning light washing over the fields, and the smell of fresh grass mingling with the ever-present scent of wood smoke. It is a season of growth, but also of challenges, as you discover in your daily bread making. The heat and humidity affect your dough, making it rise faster and sometimes unpredictably. You adjust your recipes, experimenting with timing and ingredients, feeling the connection between environment and outcome as palpably as the warmth in your hands. Meanwhile, the village buzzes with news. Brander's influence is growing more subtly now, as he aligns himself with powerful chieftains who see the value in controlling recipe ownership for economic and political gain. You sense the stakes have shifted. It is no longer just about bread, but about power, identity, and control over culture itself. You hear whispers of secret meetings, where alliances are forged and broken like brittle crusts. You remind yourself that every loaf you bake carries the weight of this struggle, a delicate balance between tradition and innovation, community and competition. At one such meeting, you and Freydis share a quiet moment, breaking bread and discussing the future. She wonders aloud whether recipes should be locked away or set free, like seeds scattered by the wind, growing in unpredictable ways. You think about the quirky idea that some Icelanders believed bread could carry a person's spirit, and that sharing a loaf was an act of trust and connection. It makes you smile, imagining how something so simple could hold so much meaning. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were common or isolated, but the symbolism is clear. Food is never just food. The summer nights bring gatherings around fires, where stories and recipes are exchanged under the endless twilight. You listen to tales of distant lands, and strange ingredients, feeling both the pull of the wider world and the roots of your homeland. One night, a traveling merchant offers you a spice you've never encountered before, a small sack of bright red berries said to add warmth and depth to bread. You take it home, curious and cautious. As you prepare to try this new ingredient, you realize how your journey through the saga of bread and law has changed you. You are no longer just a baker defending a recipe. You are a keeper of stories, a bridge between past and future, tradition and change. Outside, the stars begin to blink awake, their steady light a reminder that, despite all the disputes and dramas, some things remain constant, like the comfort of fresh bread breaking the dawn. The summer sun lingers late into the evening, casting long shadows over the fields as you prepare for the village's annual baking festival, a lively occasion where bakers, farmers, and traders gather to showcase their finest loaves and exchange stories. It is a celebration of community and tradition, but beneath the laughter and music, you sense the undercurrents of tension. Brander, ever ambitious, has brought a new batch of exotic recipes from his travels, sparking both curiosity and unease. Some bakers fear that these foreign influences threaten the purity of their ancestral breads, while others see opportunity in the fresh flavors and techniques. You watch as old friends debate passionately over dough and ovens, their voices rising and falling like the heat beneath the stones. You find yourself in the middle of these conversations, reflecting on how food has become a battleground for identity and power. Amid the festivities, you stumble upon a curious tradition, a contest where bakers compete to create bread that best represents the spirit of Iceland, hardy, resilient, and deeply connected to the land. The judges, including the last speaker himself, deliberate carefully, weighing taste, texture, and story behind each loaf. You notice a quirky custom. Contestants must recite a short saga or poem alongside their bread, linking culinary craft to storytelling. It reminds you of the old belief that bread carries more than flavor. It carries memory and meaning. Historians still debate whether this storytelling contest was a widespread tradition or a later invention, but it perfectly captures the intertwined nature of Icelandic culture. As the festival winds down, you reflect on your own journey, from court disputes to communal celebrations. You realize that bread is more than survival. It is connection, culture, and a canvas for creativity. Freydis finds you by the fire, her eyes sparkling with excitement. She shares a new idea, creating a communal recipe book to preserve and celebrate the village's diverse baking traditions. It feels like a hopeful step toward unity. Outside, the stars twinkle softly, the northern sky a vast tapestry of light and shadow. You take a deep breath, savoring the moment and the simple joy of a warm loaf shared among friends. The days grow shorter, and a crispness returns to the air, signaling the approach of autumn. You notice the golden hues creeping into the leaves, the landscape shifting from vibrant greens to muted ochres and browns. The harvest season is in full swing, and with it comes both abundance and urgency. Your mornings begin with the scent of freshly baked bread mingling with the earthy aroma of ripe grain. You move through your kitchen with practiced ease, your hands remembering the rhythm of kneading, folding, and shaping dough that has sustained your people for generations. Yet, beneath this comforting routine, a new challenge looms. The communal recipe book idea that Freitas proposed at the festival has sparked a quiet controversy. Some elders worry that writing down and sharing recipes will strip them of their sacredness, reducing them to mere instructions instead of treasured heirlooms. You find yourself navigating delicate conversations about ownership, tradition, and trust. These discussions feel like weaving a tapestry, each thread representing a person's hopes, fears, and memories. In the village hall, debates flare as the All Thing considers formalizing rules about recipe sharing and copyright. It is a balancing act between protecting individual creativity and fostering collective identity. A quirky story surfaces during one meeting. An Icelandic baker once attempted to curse a rival by casting a spell on their oven, causing loaves to burn mysteriously. While some laughed it off as superstition, it highlighted how seriously baking rivalries could be taken. Historians still argue whether such magical practices were common or exceptional, but they add a layer of intrigue to the saga. You reflect on how recipes are not just about ingredients, but about people, places, and stories passed through time. They connect you to ancestors and descendants, weaving your small actions into a larger human narrative. Outside, the wind carries the distant sound of a lone fiddle, its melancholy notes blending with the rustle of autumn leaves. You take a deep breath, feeling the weight of history and the lightness of possibility, knowing that your journey is part of an ever-evolving story. The first snow dusts the mountaintops, and a hush settles over the village like a soft blanket. You pull your cloak tighter, savoring the last warmth of the fire as you prepare bread infused with spices borrowed from far-off lands. Those bright red berries from the merchant's sack mingling with wild Icelandic herbs. The aroma fills your home, a quiet celebration of the season's changes and your own journey. The All Things debates have reached a tentative resolution. A communal recipe book will be created, but with strict guidelines protecting individual contributions and respecting oral traditions. It feels like a fragile truce, balancing respect for personal creativity with the need to preserve and share cultural heritage. You marvel at the complexity of this solution, realizing that it mirrors the nature of bread itself, both personal and communal, simple and layered. At the village gathering marking the winter solstice, bakers present their loaves, each telling a story of struggle, hope, and connection. You listen as Freitas recites a poem honoring the resilience of Icelanders, her voice soft but strong. A quirky fact bubbles up. Some medieval Icelanders believed that sharing bread during the solstice could ward off bad luck for the coming year, a tradition blending faith and food in a way that feels timeless. Historians still debate whether these rituals were widespread or local customs, but then the deep bond between community and cuisine. You reflect on how far this saga has brought you, from courtroom battles over recipes to communal celebrations of shared heritage. Bread has been your constant companion, a symbol of identity, resistance, and creativity. Outside, the northern lights dance faintly, their ghostly colors weaving through the dark sky. You feel a gentle peace settle over you, a sense that your story, like the lights, is part of something larger, an enduring thread in the tapestry of time. Winter's deep quiet wraps the village in stillness, the snow muffling footsteps and softening the world into a serene white canvas. Inside your kitchen, the hearth glows warmly, casting flickering shadows on wooden walls scarred by years of baking and conversation. You sit with a fresh loaf, its crust crackling softly as you break it apart, savoring the familiar comfort. Reflecting on this long journey, you recognize how bread has been more than sustenance. It has been a symbol of identity, a source of conflict, and a bridge between generations. The lawsuits, the debates, the shared recipes, they have all shaped the culture you live and breathe. You remember the early court case that set everything in motion, the heated arguments, the unexpected friendships forged, and the lessons learned about power, trust, and community. Each loaf baked since then carries those stories, woven invisibly into the crumb. The communal recipe book now sits on a shelf in the village hall, a testament to compromise and hope. It is a living document, ever-changing, just like the people who contribute to it. Freitas, Leaf, Brander, and countless others have added their mark. Each loaf a story, each recipe a piece of the puzzle. A quirky final thought drifts to you. Some medieval Icelanders believed that bread held the power to preserve memories, almost like a time capsule. Breaking bread with someone was, in a way, sharing their history and future. Historians still debate the literal truth of this belief, but it captures the essence of what you have come to understand, that food is a language, a connector, a keeper of human experience. Outside, the northern sky glimmers with stars, the cold air crisp and still. You feel a deep calm settle over you, a sense of belonging to a story far greater than yourself, one that will continue long after this winter fades. Now, as you set down your bread and prepare to rest, remember, every loaf tells a tale, every recipe a thread in the vast, unfolding fabric of human history. Slowly, the pace of your thoughts begins to soften like the gentle fading of twilight into night. The warmth of the hearth lingers, wrapping around you as if to lull you into a quiet, peaceful rest. Imagine the aroma of freshly baked bread, that comforting mix of warmth, yeast, and a whisper of wild herbs settling softly in the air around you. It is a scent that carries memories of shared meals and laughter, of struggles overcome and bonds formed. You feel the quiet rhythm of breath and heart, steady and slow, as the world outside grows still beneath the vast, dark sky studded with shimmering stars. The northern lights flicker faintly in the distance, their delicate colors weaving a soft, invisible thread across the night. They remind you that every story, every loaf, every tiny spark of human connection is part of something larger, an endless, beautiful tapestry that stretches beyond time. The disputes and debates over recipes, the courtroom dramas and whispered conversations, the fears and hopes, all these become part of the rich texture of life, much like the layers of flavor in your bread. You understand now that food is never just food. It is a keeper of history, a language without words, a way to pass on identity and love. So, as you drift towards sleep, let the stories settle gently in your mind, like flour dust on a wooden table. Know that you are part of this ongoing saga, connected across centuries by something as simple and profound as breaking bread. Rest easy. Tomorrow is another day to bake, to live, and to carry the stories forward.